Hi, my name is Angela Anthony, and I'm going to be teaching you how to examine and look at a Langstroth beehive, which is a typical beehive that both commercial and hobbyist beekeepers here in North America use. The first thing that you're going to want to do when you're looking at getting into a hive is to make sure that you have all your equipment that you're going to be using already set up and ready to go. So if you're wearing a suit, then you would have the suit on. If you needed your smoker, then you'd have your smoker already going. You would have your hive tool, which is the tool that we use to get in and out of the hive and to move the frames around, which I'll show you in just a moment. And then we would also have our brush. And so our brush is going to be used to kind of gently brush the bees away, to not hurt them, but to get them to move so that we can examine whatever we want to see inside of the hive. Now, the one thing I will tell you today is that we're actually using a hive that is empty of bees. The reason for that is because here in Oklahoma the weather is still kind of iffy, and it's actually too cold today to get into a hive that's got live bees into it. So if it's below 50 degrees, we don't want to expose the bees that are inside of a hive to that kind of weather. The same thing if it's cloudy as well, then you don't want to expose bees to weather they don't necessarily like. So the first thing that you would do if we were all suited up, which I'm not going to have gloves on either, if I was actually checking a live hive, I would go ahead and have my gloves on. And then I would also have the hood of my bee suit here on as well. And that would just be to protect me from the bees if we were worried about getting stung. But again, we're using a hive that doesn't have any bees in it. So the first thing that you would do is you would come up to the side of the beehive. So I'll move around here to the front. And if you were checking a hive, you're going to look to see what the bees are doing, the ones that are coming in and out of the entrance. So if you can see here, there's a teeny tiny hole. So we're using what's known as an entrance reducer, and that just helps to keep predators or mice or anything like that out of the beehive. But you would watch this particular entranceway and also what's going on here on kind of the platform, the landing platform, to see what the bees are doing. So, are there bees that are hanging out that are just kind of watching the environment? Are there bees that are flying into the hive, carrying pollen? Are there bees kind of out here slowly circling? That's what's known as an orientation flight. Or do you see a lot of frenzied activity and it looks like there's bees that are fighting? Because if that's the case, then more than likely then you might have robbing going on, where another hive from a different area is coming into and taking pollen, honey, and everything from this particular colony. So once we would look to see what's going on at the entrance and we kind of get an idea or a picture of what the bees are doing, then we're going to go ahead and open this hive. Now the first thing that I would do is I'm going to remove what's known as the outer cover, which is this part that's right here. So we're not actually in the hive when we take this particular piece off. There's still another piece, another cover. It's known as the inner hive cover. You can see it here. It's the different color from the white actual brood box that's here. And so you would see bees on the outside of this. There's a hole, and I'll show you that here in a second, that bees would be coming out of because they would realize at this point that, hey, our hive is being kind of broken into, right? Because they don't know us from predators, for example. So the first thing that I would do once I would take that outer box off is I would go ahead and get my smoker and would put it about level with the beehive, and I would give it about 2 good puffs. And so what that's doing is it's going to introduce a little bit of smoke into that beehive, and that's going to calm the bees down. Now you don't want to come up here and actively put it down in the hole and put a lot of smoke into that, because that's going to irritate the bees. So what we're trying to do is just kind of calm them down, drive them down into the hive so that we can take the inner hive cover off and get into this hive without having to worry about loss, for example. So the next thing that I would do, and sometimes you would need to do this, so the bees use propolis to glue everything down, so sometimes the inner hive cover might be stuck. So you would just kind of come along on all the sides of it and kind of give it kind of a little bit of effort here to be able to open that hive if we needed to do that. And then we would go ahead and take that inner cover off. And so that's what I was talking about for the hole that's here that the bees can come in and out of. So that helps a little bit with the bees getting air. Now I did say that this particular hive doesn't have any bees in it, but I did use this hive, and so you can see here where their bees were going through, and they were putting the propolis and building, gluing this particular inner cover down onto the frames. So once we're into here, and you would see bees on this, so you could take this and brush the bees back down into the hive. The main reason why we want to worry about the bees being inside of the hive is not because bees can't fly. They can fly, right? What we're worried about is losing the queen. And so more than likely the queen's going to be somewhere in the middle of this hive, but if she wasn't, we would want to try to keep her in the hive as much as possible. So once we get the bees off of this, we can go ahead and put this down. At this point, the bees will be everywhere. So if we really had live bees here, then there would be bees swarming all over, landing on the camera, all of that. So that does help as well with doing this with a non-live hive, is not having to worry about all the bees all over the place. So once we get into here, then you're going to have 10 frames that are in here going across. And the main thing to remember is that it's very important that you use another box to be able to move the frames from. So the frames are going to be lined up a certain way, and I'm going to go ahead and move my tools down. And so I would have another deep brood box ready. So this is what the box looks like without the frames inside. And I'll show you, I'll tilt this up so you can see what it looks like with frames. And so we've got 2 frames missing, and I'll show you why here in just a second. But at this point, what I would do is I would start using my tool, and I would work those frames apart, and then I would pick them up and I would look at both sides of these frames to see what's going on this particular hive, and then I would go ahead and set them down in the same order that I'm moving from one brood box to the other, and then that way they're going to go back in the same order as well. The bees are very particular about something called bee space. You can look that up online, and so they have built this particular hive, once you get into it, to their specifications, and so we want to make sure that those pieces go back into the way that they're supposed to. So once we would do that, we look at some more frames, and we go ahead and put those in all the way down to the very last frame. And if the bees start coming up, if it looks like a lot of activity, then you can go ahead and you can give it a couple of more puffs there as needed across the top of the hive, not down inside of that, to go ahead and check that hive. And the same thing with the bee brush. You know, you could brush the bees down as needed to get them off the top. That way you can work a little bit easier with pulling the frames out. Once we get all of the frames checked, if we had 2 boxes, some hives of course can be several boxes tall, then we would go ahead and put everything back in the same order. The main thing to remember is to put the frames into a box. You don't want to put them on the ground. And again, like I said, what we're trying to do is we're trying to mitigate loss of the queen. So I'll go ahead and put these frames back in. You'll be doing this one at a time. And then from here, you would go ahead and give all the sides of the beehive a good brush to get most of the bees off of there. And you could go ahead and put the inner cover on, and then the outer cover as well. And that is how you check a beehive.